Hello, this is the last lesson in Module 3 about considerations in lesson planning. A good lesson plan involves consideration of more than just what is going to be taught, like the objective, and how it will be taught, materials, equipment, and activities. This lecture will summarize aspects of a lesson that need to be considered in planning, considerations for instructional activities, as well as put forward some hints for classroom management. On the screen, you can see elements that need to be thought about and planned for. Sequencing. Do the activities move logically so learners are progressively building on what they already know? Do the activities flow well? Are transitions between activities smooth? Pacing. Are activities the right length and vary so that learners remain engaged and enthused? Gauging difficulty. Do the learners have enough skill and knowledge to do the planned activities? Are the instructions clear? Accounting for individual differences. Do the activities allow for learners of varying proficiency levels to receive extra attention they might need, whether below or above the norm? Are all students actively involved? Monitoring learner versus teacher talk. What is the balance between learner talk and teacher talk? Does the lesson allow a time for learners to interact, producing and initiating language? Timing. Was the amount of time allotted for each part of the lesson sufficient? If the planned lesson finishes early, is there a backup activity ready? If the lesson wasn't completed as planned, how can the next class be adjusted to finish the material? Most of these aspects of lesson planning are learned by experience, so it is important for the instructor to evaluate how the lesson went at the end of each class period. Ask the following questions. What went well? Why? What did not go as planned? Why? If I had it to do over again, what would I change? What have I learned about my students that I can account for in future lesson planning? A lesson plan acts as a roadmap for a class section. It identifies the destination, known as objective of the lesson, and marks out the route, which is activities for each stage of the lesson. It is an aid for both new and seasoned teachers. New teachers should write down the details of each activity, perhaps even script them. Experience will guide how detailed a lesson plan needs to be. Sharing the plan with learner, for example, writing the objective and a brief description of activities on the board, keeps both the teacher and the learner focused on where they are going, how they are going to get there, and when they arrive. There are some variables that relate to the instructional activities that should be considered. What follows is a brief description of some of them. Any planned instructional procedure or teaching method for a particular lesson should also address the following questions. Does the lesson plan permit adjustment for students with different abilities? There probably has never been a teacher who had a class of students whose members were of equal ability. The instructional methods planned for a particular lesson must take into account student ability. There is no substitute for doing this. The range of abilities in which students differ is truly staggering. Included are cognitive disorders, emotional handicaps, physical handicaps, and student mastery of appropriate prerequisites for any given lesson. It's a load to factor all this in. But as a lesson planner, you should at least have a serious awareness of this. Does the lesson plan encourage students to become continually involved in learning activities? Instructional activities or procedures should not be static descriptions of what the teacher and students will do. Any good teacher will tell you that he or she makes adjustments in instructions based on feedback from students. The idea is obviously to keep students focused and involved in learning. For students to be continually involved in learning activities will require resourcefulness on the part of the teacher, but it is a consideration important to planning any lesson. Does the lesson provide for adequate coverage of the content to be learned for all students? Adequate and cover can mean almost anything, depending on whom you ask, and often mean little or nothing. Probably the best way to think about this is to say to yourself, what is the least amount of content the students should learn to indicate some level of agreed upon mastery? Notice the operative word is learn. If you've thought about what you're doing, you will have specified this level of learning in the criteria statement of the lesson objective. Click on that Learn link above and read in the Johnson schema for curriculum what I mean by learning. Does the lesson permit for monitoring of students' progress? You should consider how you will monitor the progress of your students during the lesson itself. There are ways to this, and these ways are collectively referred to in education jargon as formative evaluation. All this means is that you must determine how you will monitor the progress of your students. The purpose of this monitoring is not just to collect information about student progress. Rather, it is to have ways in mind about how to use this information to make instant changes in lesson procedures. If you consider a lesson as a collection of discrete activities that are sequenced in some responsible way, then each activity has a beginning and an end. The ends may be thought as an event, and it is here that meaningful information about student progress may be derived. The events are milestones on the path toward the lesson objective. Information about how the students are progressing may indicate that some reconsolidation and reordering of the sequence of the milestones is warranted. Does the lesson provide for adequate assistance for students who do not learn from the initial procedure? If only everyone got it right the first time. The reality is that almost no lesson is 100% reliable. That means some students will fall behind. They won't get it, and you need to think about what to do about that. The problem is compounded because you are confronted with the real problem of what to do with the students who did get it, while you are attending to those who didn't. Usual pedagogical thinking suggests that the got it students can be given some ancillary work or some enrichment materials while you work with the students who need your help. Maybe you just be aware that this will start to wear thin after a few lessons. This is one of the internal problems in teaching, and it has really not been solved to anyone's satisfaction. Does the lesson provide adequate practice to permit consolidation and integration of skills? Vince Lombardi is reputed to have said, "Practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect." Of course, he was talking about skills related to playing football. The operative word here, skills. There is no substitute for developing and mastering skills rather than practice. That always means, in a practical sense, that there is a skilled observer of the practice who can provide feedback to the learner. It is true in every field where skills are taught in some formal way. The quality of the practice, and just as important, the quality of the feedback to the learner, are indispensable. Skills are one thing, but what about conceptual learning? What about understandings we want our students to acquire? Is there any way to practice developing concepts? This is a thorny question, since concepts are unique to the individual forming them. It is difficult to practice doing this. Probably the best a teacher can do is have students explain in more than one way what they know. Therefore, conceptual learning is incompatible with multiple choice tests. Anyone planning a lesson should, at least, keep in mind the posed questions. Answering them for each lesson can improve instruction. Finally, after posing such questions during lesson planning, you should think about practical hints for lesson management. Prepare more than you need. It is advisable to have an easily presented, light reserved activity ready in case of extra time. 2. Similarly, note in advance which components of a lesson you will sacrifice if you find yourself with too little time for everything. 3. Keep a watch or clock easily visible. Make sure you are aware throughout how time is going relative to your program. It is difficult to judge intuitively how time is going when you are busy, and the smooth running of your lesson depends to some extent on proper timing. 4. Do not leave the giving of homework to the last minute. At the end of the lesson, learner's attention is at a low ebb, and you may run out of time before you finish explaining. Explain it earlier on, and then give a quick reminder at the end. 5. If you have papers to distribute and a large class, do not try to give every paper yourself to every student. Give a number of papers to people at different points in the class. Ask them to take one and pass the rest on. 6. If you are doing group work, give instructions and make sure these are understood before dividing into groups, or even, if practicable, handing out materials. If you do it the other way round, the students will be looking at each other and at the materials, and they are less likely to attend to what you have to say. In this lecture, we've covered 3 main points. Aspects of a lesson that need to be considered in planning, considerations for instructional activities, and some practical hints for effective classroom management. Thank you for watching.